He was a man forgotten by the world, a veteran who once risked everything for his country, now living on the streets with nothing but his pride. One night, under the harsh glare of flashing lights, a police officer saw only a homeless black man and treated him like a criminal. But what that officer didn't know was that this man carried a secret, a symbol of honor that would turn the tables in an instant. What happens when society's most overlooked soul reveals he is in fact a hero? He wasn't always invisible. Once, Raymond Carter had worn the uniform of the United States Army with pride. The weight of the medals on his chest had been nothing compared to the weight of responsibility he carried for his brothers in arms. He had served in the Middle East, surviving nights filled with sandstorms, gunfire, and the unshakable knowledge that tomorrow was never promised. He had come home with scars, some on his body, most buried deep within. Yet for a while, he walked tall, respected, and recognized for his service. But time has a way of erasing faces that don't stay in the spotlight. Raymond's return to civilian life wasn't filled with parades or job offers. Instead, he came back to a country that seemed to have no place for him. A combat injury made steady work nearly impossible, and medical bills piled up faster than his benefits could cover. Slowly, the life he had dreamed of slipped through his fingers. First his apartment, then his car, and finally, even the sense of belonging he once had in his community. By the time the story begins, Raymond was a man the city barely noticed. He drifted between shelters, sometimes sleeping on park benches or beneath overpasses, carrying only a small backpack filled with the few belongings he still owned. His most treasured possession was an old weathered box tucked deep inside, something he rarely opened, but never let out of his sight. On the streets, people passed him as if he were part of the concrete. Some averted their eyes, others muttered cruel words under their breath. To them, he was just another homeless black man, someone to fear, avoid, or dismiss. What they didn't see were the sacrifices he had made, the friends he had lost, and the nights he had spent awake to ensure strangers back home could sleep safely. Every morning, Raymond rose with the sun, washing his face in public restrooms, standing in line for day-old food and walking miles just to find a safe spot to rest. Life was a constant battle for dignity, and each day chipped away at the pride he once carried. Yet beneath the worn clothes and tired eyes was still a soldier's heart, unbroken, waiting for something or someone to recognize it again. The city around him was unforgiving. Skyscrapers stretched toward the clouds, polished and gleaming, symbols of wealth and opportunity that seemed forever out of reach. Below them, people like Raymond blended into the shadows, reminders of a system that too often failed the very people who had given the most. He had grown used to being ignored, but not to being disrespected. That was something he never accepted quietly. And it was this quiet strength, this refusal to bow to humiliation, that sometimes drew unwanted attention. On one particular evening, as the sky turned orange and the hum of traffic filled the air, Raymond found himself resting near the steps of a closed store. It was nothing unusual for him, a moment to ease his aching legs after a long day of wandering. Yet what seemed ordinary would soon spiral into something far greater than he could have imagined, because in that moment, he wasn't just a man trying to survive. To some he was a target. His skin color, his worn appearance, his very presence on the street made him suspicious in the eyes of those who had sworn to protect. And when flashing lights cut through the twilight and a police car pulled up beside him, Raymond's life was about to collide with a harsh truth. Not all battles are fought on foreign soil. Some are fought right at home, in the very streets he once believed he had defended for freedom. He straightened his back as the officer stepped out, the weight of experience telling him this encounter would not be simple. He had faced hostility before, but tonight carried a different air. Tonight, the past and present were about to crash together in a way that would expose more than anyone was ready to see. Raymond didn't yet know it, but this encounter would test not only his patience and dignity, but also reveal the power of a hidden truth he had kept close for years. And when that truth came to light, it would leave everyone, especially the officer who approached him, forever changed. The officer's footsteps echoed against the empty storefront as he closed the car door. His shadow stretched long across the pavement, cutting into the spot where Raymond sat, The officer's hand rested casually on his belt, fingers brushing the edge of his holster, a silent reminder of the authority he carried. Raymond looked up, tired but calm, the way a man looks when he's seen too much to be easily rattled. Yet he knew the signs. He had felt that stare before. The one that didn't see him as a veteran, or even as a man, but as a problem to be dealt with. The officer demanded he move along, his voice sharp and dismissive, as though Raymond were trash left on the sidewalk. But Raymond wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't blocking the way, wasn't disturbing anyone. He was simply existing. Still, the order was barked again, louder this time. Each word edged with impatience and something colder, something laced with prejudice. When Raymond didn't spring up fast enough, the officer's irritation grew. To him, Raymond wasn't just a homeless man. He was a black homeless man. That single fact magnified suspicion, twisted perception, and fueled hostility. The officer saw not a veteran, not a survivor, but a stereotype he felt entitled to control. Raymond slowly rose to his feet, every motion deliberate. He had learned long ago that sudden movements could be dangerous in moments like this. His hands stayed visible, his eyes steady. Yet no matter how calm he remained, the officer's stance grew more aggressive, as though Raymond's very presence was an act of defiance. The conversation that followed wasn't really a conversation at all. It was an accusation masked as authority. Where was he coming from? Why was he here? Did he have drugs, weapons, stolen goods? Questions that carried no real interest in answers, only in justification. Justification for what the officer already seemed eager to do. As other people passed by on the sidewalk, their eyes flickered briefly toward the scene, then quickly away. Some shook their heads, muttering judgments about Raymond's appearance. Others simply hurried off, unwilling to get involved. Each pair of eyes that turned away reminded him of how invisible he had become in the city he once protected. Then the officer's patience snapped. Without warning, he shoved Raymond back against the wall, frisking him roughly, ignoring the protest in Raymond's voice. His few possessions spilled onto the pavement, the worn backpack, the tattered blanket, the small box he always kept hidden. The officer kicked the items aside carelessly, searching with the assumption that guilt must be hiding somewhere among them. Humiliation burned hotter than anger in that moment. Raymond had endured pain in battlefields far away, but this was different. This was the sting of being treated as less than human in his own homeland. He clenched his jaw, trying to hold on to dignity as strangers passed, some whispering, some recording with their phones, none stepping in to help. The officer finally yanked his arms behind him, cold steel biting into his wrists as handcuffs locked tight. Raymond didn't resist. He had nothing to gain by fighting. But inside, a storm raged. This was not just about being homeless. This was about being judged by the color of his skin, stripped of respect he had earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. As the officer pushed him toward the squad car, Raymond's eyes flickered toward the small box lying on the ground. It had tumbled open in the scuffle, its contents glinting faintly under the streetlight. The officer didn't notice, too focused on the arrest. But Raymond did. His heart pounded at the thought of what might happen when that secret, his greatest proof of worth, was discovered. The ride to the precinct was long and heavy with silence. Raymond sat in the back seat, wrists aching, mind replaying the moment again and again. How had it come to this? How had a man who had once saluted the flag and led men into battle now become a suspect for simply sitting too long in the wrong place? At the station, the process was even more degrading. Shoes off, belongings searched again, fingerprints pressed into ink. Every step stripped another layer of dignity, another reminder that in this space, he wasn't a veteran. He wasn't a man. He was just another statistic, another body to fill the holding cells. But even as the door to the cell clanged shut behind him, Raymond felt a strange sense of inevitability. The box had been taken in with his belongings, and he knew it wouldn't stay unnoticed for long. Inside lay the truth the officer had been blind to, the truth that would turn this entire situation upside down. For now, he sat on the cold bench, surrounded by the stench of concrete and despair, waiting. He knew the story wasn't over. The walls around him might have been built to contain, but they could not contain the revelation that was about to shake them. Because when the truth surfaced, It would not just expose one officer's prejudice. It would force everyone in that room to confront a painful reality. Sometimes, the heroes we discard are the very ones who have sacrificed the most. And when the secret finally came to light, nothing would ever be the same again. The holding cell was small, suffocating, its walls painted with decades of despair. The air reeked of sweat and stale metal, every sound magnified, the clang of distant doors, the shuffle of boots, the low murmurs of men who had been through this process too many times. Raymond sat on the hard bench, wrists sore, his back stiff, his pride shredded. Yet inside, a simmering storm refused to die. He had been through worse in war zones. He had faced explosions that shook the earth, bullets that sang past his ears. But nothing compared to the humiliation of being stripped of his humanity in the very country he had fought for. The battlefield had nearly taken his life. But this felt like it was trying to take his soul. The officer who had arrested him strutted past the bars with smug confidence, exchanging casual jokes with another cop as if what he had done was just another notch on his belt. To him, Raymond wasn't a man. He was just another statistic to process, another target subdued, another story that wouldn't matter until the box. It sat on the desk across the room, small, weathered, unremarkable to most. One of the officers picked it up, shaking it lightly, curiosity flickering across his face. When he pried it open, the room shifted. The dull hum of routine gave way to silence so sharp it cut through the air. Inside was the unmistakable shimmer of a Medal of Honor. The officer who had been joking froze, his laughter cut short. The smug expression drained from the face of the man who had cuffed Raymond hours earlier. The ribbon, frayed but still proud, gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a symbol of sacrifice, courage, and the highest honor a soldier could receive. It wasn't just a medal. It was proof that the man sitting in that cell wasn't a criminal or a nuisance. He was a decorated hero. Word spread quickly through the precinct. Curious eyes peeked in. Whispers darted across the room. Some officers leaned closer, disbelief etched into their features. Others stepped back, ashamed of the uniform they wore, knowing what had just happened was a stain none of them could wash away. But the one who felt the weight most was the arresting officer. His chest heaved as if the walls were closing in. His authority, his arrogance, his prejudice, it all collapsed under the gravity of that medal. His voice faltered when he tried to explain himself, stammering excuses that sounded hollow even to his own ears. I didn't know who he was. I thought, but no one was listening. The truth was visible, undeniable. He hadn't seen a veteran. He hadn't seen a man. He had only seen color, poverty, vulnerability. And in doing so, he had humiliated a hero who had once risked everything for the very badge pinned to his chest. An older officer stepped forward, his face tight with restrained anger. He picked up the medal reverently, holding it as though it were something sacred. His eyes flickered to Raymond through the bars, and for the first time that night, respect entered the room. The kind of respect that should have been there from the very beginning. The door to the holding cell creaked open, the keys jangling in uncertain hands. The officer who had cuffed Raymond avoided his eyes, shame written across every line of his face. The silence was louder than any apology he could have spoken. Raymond stood slowly, his body aching from hours on the cold bench, but his back straightened with the dignity he refused to let them steal. As he stepped out of the cell, all eyes followed him. Not as a criminal, not as a homeless man, but as a soldier, a hero, a man wronged. Yet the damage was done. The humiliation, the degradation, the racism, none of it vanished because of a medal. It hung in the air like smoke, choking everyone who had witnessed it. For Raymond, the release from the cell didn't erase the sting of the officer's hand shoving him against the wall, or the cold steel biting into his wrists. The scars of that moment ran deeper than the surface. The officer who arrested him tried to mutter something, perhaps an explanation, perhaps a plea, but the words dissolved under the weight of his guilt. Raymond didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence was its own verdict. As Raymond held the medal in his hand once more, a strange mixture of emotions coursed through him. Pride in what it represented, pain in what he had endured, rage at how easily his worth had been dismissed, and beneath it all, a question that refused to leave. How many others had suffered the same treatment, but without something tangible to prove their value? The room remained hushed, the weight of the truth pressing down on everyone inside. It wasn't just about Raymond anymore. It was about the system, the assumptions, the racism that had made this moment possible, and now it could not be ignored. Raymond walked out of the precinct with the medal tucked safely against his chest, the night air cold but liberating. Behind him, the officer who had put him there stood frozen, his career and conscience unraveling in real time. The battle was far from over, but the turning point had arrived. The man they tried to erase had been revealed as a hero, and the shame of that revelation would ripple far beyond the walls of the station. Because the truth had surfaced, and now there was no going back. The cold night air wrapped around Raymond as he stepped outside the precinct, the heavy metal door clanging shut behind him. For a moment, he simply stood there, metal pressed tightly in his hand, the faint glimmer of the ribbon catching the glow of the streetlights. The city buzzed as it always did, cars rushing past, strangers lost in their own worlds. But for Raymond, time felt suspended. He was free. Not because justice had been served, but because chance had forced the truth into the open. The little box he had guarded with such care had spoken louder than any words he could have uttered. Without it, he would still be sitting on that hard bench, another nameless man swallowed by the system. The thought weighed heavily on him, because the reality was undeniable. His freedom wasn't granted out of fairness. It was granted out of shame. Shame that the officer had arrested a Medal of Honor recipient. Shame that the system had been caught humiliating one of its supposed heroes. But what about those who carried no medal? What about the countless men and women who faced the same prejudice and walked away with scars no ribbon could erase? As Raymond walked down the quiet street, the questions gnawed at him. He thought of brothers he had served with, men who never made it home. He thought of the veterans he had met at shelters, haunted by the same struggles, invisible to the same world. How many of them had been shoved against a wall? How many had been handcuffed, ridiculed, dismissed, simply for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time? His story had a strange kind of protection, but theirs didn't. And that was the deeper injustice. Raymond found himself back at the small park where he often rested. The bench was cold, but he sat down, shoulders heavy yet unbroken. He pulled the medal from its box, letting it rest in his palm. The memories it carried were vivid. The firefight in the desert, the friends he lost that day, the sheer will it took to keep moving when everything screamed to stop. That medal represented sacrifice, yes, but tonight, it also represented survival in a different kind of war, a war fought not on foreign soil, but in the streets of his own country. He couldn't shake the sting of the officer's eyes, filled not with respect, but with contempt. That moment had carved something permanent into him. It was a reminder that no matter what he had given, the color of his skin could still erase it in the eyes of those too blind to see the man before them. And yet, there was also something else. Something that had flickered in the silence after the medal was revealed. Respect, shame, reflection. Those in the precinct had seen the truth laid bare, and whether they admitted it or not, it had left a mark on them. Perhaps not enough to undo the damage, but enough to plant a seed. Seeds of accountability, seeds of awareness. Raymond knew change didn't happen overnight. He had fought enough battles to understand that victory was rarely quick or easy. But he also knew this. Silence was complicity. His story, painful as it was, couldn't just remain his own. It had to be told. Because for every person who ignored him on the street, there were others who needed to see him. Not as a stereotype, not as a statistic, but as a man. A soldier, a survivor. The days that followed carried whispers of what had happened. Some in the precinct tried to bury it, while others couldn't shake it from their minds. The officer who had cuffed him found his reputation unraveling, his name spoken in tones of disgrace rather than authority. And while no punishment could undo the harm, the truth had forced itself into the open. For Raymond, the impact was quieter but deeper. Each step he took reminded him that his worth was not defined by the prejudice of others. His scars were not symbols of shame but of endurance, and though the world might still turn its eyes away, he would keep walking. because his story was bigger than him. It was the story of countless others who had been silenced, dismissed, or erased. As he tucked the medal back into its box, he thought about the question that lingered like smoke in the air. How many heroes had been lost in the shadows because no one bothered to look closer? How many lives had been broken because judgment came quicker than compassion? The answer he knew was too many, and that truth demanded more than silence. Raymond lifted his eyes to the night sky, the city lights blurring against the darkness. He had fought one war overseas and another back home. Both left scars. Both taught him the cost of survival. But one truth remained unshaken. Dignity was worth fighting for, no matter how many times the world tried to strip it away. This story is not just about one man. It is about a system that sees color before character, poverty before sacrifice, and stereotype before truth. It is about the weight carried by those who are unseen, and the shame carried by those who refuse to see. And so the question becomes, how many more Raymond Carters will it take before we finally understand? Because heroes should not need medals to be treated like human beings.